The Illinois Central Railroad, sometimes called the Main Line of Mid-America, was a railroad in the central United States, with its primary routes connecting Chicago, Illinois, with New Orleans, Louisiana, and Mobile, Alabama. A line also connected Chicago with Sioux City, Iowa. There was a significant branch to Omaha, Nebraska, west of Fort Dodge, Iowa, and another branch reaching Sioux Falls, South Dakota, starting from Cherokee, Iowa. The Sioux Falls branch has been abandoned in its entirety. The Canadian National Railway gained control of the IC in 1998. History. Riding on the City of New Orleans, Illinois Central Monday morning rail. 15 cars and 15 restless riders, 3 conductors and 25 sacks of mail. Good morning, America. How are you? Say, don't you know me? I'm your native son. The IC is one of the early Class I railroads in the U.S. Its roots go back to abortive attempts by the Illinois General Assembly to chart a railroad linking the northern and southern parts of the state of Illinois. In 1850, U.S. President Millard Fillmore signed a land grant for the construction of the railroad, making the Illinois Central the first land grant railroad in the United States. The Illinois Central was chartered by the Illinois General Assembly on February 10, 1851. Senator Stephen Douglas and later President Abraham Lincoln were both Illinois Central men who lobbied for it. Douglas owned land near the terminal in Chicago. Lincoln was a lawyer for the railroad. Upon its completion in 1856, the IC was the longest railroad in the world. Its main line went from Cairo, Illinois, at the southern tip of the state, to Galena, in the northwest corner. A branch line went from Centralia to the rapidly growing city of Chicago. In Chicago, its tracks were laid along the shore of Lake Michigan and on an offshore causeway downtown, but land filling and natural deposition have moved the present-day shore to the east. In 1867, the Illinois Central extended its track into Iowa, and during the 1870s and 1880s the IC acquired and expanded railroads in the southern United States. IC lines crisscrossed the state of Mississippi and went as far as New Orleans, Louisiana, to the south, and Louisville, Kentucky, in the east. In the 1880s, northern lines were built to Dodgeville, Wisconsin, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Omaha, Nebraska. Further expansion continued into the early 20th century. The Illinois Central and the other Harriman lines, owned by E. H. Harriman, was the target of the Illinois Central shopmen's strike of 1911. Although marked by violence and sabotage in the South, Midwest, and Western states, the strike was effectively over in a few months. The railroad simply hired replacements and withstood diminishing Union pressure. The strike was eventually called off in 1915. The totals above do not include the Waterloo-A, Batesville Southwestern, Peabody Shortliner COFG and its subsidiaries. On December 31, 1925, IC, Y and AMP, MV, G and AMP, SI operated 6,562 route miles on 11,030 miles of track. A and AMP, V and VS and AMP P added 330 route miles and 491 track miles. At the end of 1970, IC operated 6,761 miles of road and 11,159 of track. Illinois Central Gulf Railroad. On August 10, 1972, the Illinois Central Railroad merged with the Gulf, Mobile and Ohio Railroad to form the Illinois Central Gulf Railroad. On October 30 that year, the Illinois Central Gulf Commuter rail crash, the company's deadliest, occurred. At the end of 1980, ICG operated 8,366 miles of railroad on 13,532 miles of track. That year it reported 33,276 million ton-miles of revenue freight, and 323 million passenger miles. Later in that decade, the railroad spun off most of its east-west lines and many of its redundant north-south lines, including much of the former GM and Amp-A. Most of these lines were bought by other railroads, including entirely new railroads such as the Chicago, Missouri and Western Railway, Paducah and Louisville Railway, Chicago Central and Pacific Railroad, and Mid-South Rail Corporation. In 1988, the railroad's then-parent company, IC Industries, spun off its remaining rail assets and changed its name to the Whitman Corporation. On February 29, 1988, the newly separated ICG dropped the Gulf from its name and again became the Illinois Central Railroad, Canadian National Railway. On February 11, 1998, the IC was purchased for approximately $2.4 billion in cash and shares by Canadian National Railway. Integration of operations began July 1, 1999. Locomotives. Passenger train service. The Illinois Central was a major carrier of passengers on its Chicago to New Orleans main line and between Chicago and St. Louis. IC also ran passengers on its Chicago to Omaha line, though it was never among the top performers on this route. Illinois Central's largest passenger terminal, Central Station, stood at 12th Street east of Michigan Avenue in Chicago. Due to the railroad's north-south route from the Gulf of Mexico to the Great Lakes, Illinois Central passenger trains were one means of transport during the African-American Great Migration of the 1920s. Illinois Central's most famous train was the Panama Limited, a premier all-Pullman car service between Chicago, St. Louis, Missouri, and New Orleans. In 1967, due to losses incurred by the operation of the train, the Illinois Central combined the Panama Limited with a coach-only train called the Magnolia Star. On May 1, 1971, Amtrak took over the operation of the service, but shortly afterward dropped the name in favor of the City of New Orleans, a daytime streamlined coach train that had been operated by the Illinois Central, whose name was popularized by a song written by Steve Goodman and performed by Arlo Guthrie. Willie Nelson's recording of the song was number 1 in 1984. Illinois Central ran several other trains along the main route, including the Creole and the Louisiana. The Green Diamond was the Illinois Central's premier train between Chicago, Springfield and St. Louis. Other important trains included the Hawkeye, which ran daily between Chicago and Sioux City, and the City of Miami, eventually running every other day between Chicago and Miami via the Atlantic Coast Line, the Central of Georgia Railroad and Florida East Coast Railway. The Illinois Central was always a major Chicago commuter line, operating electrified trains from its Michigan Avenue stations to the southeast suburbs until this traffic was assumed by Metra. After 1971, Amtrak operated the Panama Limited, later renamed City of New Orleans, over the Illinois Central Main Line and the Shawnee between Chicago and Carbondale, Illinois. Amtrak presently runs 3 trains daily over this route, the City of New Orleans and the Illini and Saluki between Chicago and Carbondale. Another Illinois corridor service is planned for the former Black Hawk route between Chicago, Rockford and Dubuque. Amtrak, at the state of Illinois' request, did a feasibility study to reinstate the Black Hawk route to Rockford and Dubuque. Initial capital costs range from $32 million to $55 million, depending on the route. Once in operation, the service would require roughly $5 million a year in subsidies from the state. On December 10, 2010, IDOT announced the route choice from the resumption of service to begin in 2014 going over mostly CN Railway. List of Illinois Central named trains: Cannonball Express, Chickasaw, City of Miami, City of New Orleans, Creole, Daylight, Delta Express, Green Diamond, Governor's Special, Hawkeye, Illini, Iowa and Irvin S. Cobb, Landaucorn, Louisiana, Kentucky Cardinal, Magnolia Star, Mid-American, Miss Lou, Night Diamond, Northern Express, Northeastern Limited, Panama Limited, Planter, Seminole, Southern Express, Southwestern Limited, Sunchaser. Company offices. Presidents of the Illinois Central Railroad have included Sidney Breese, father of the Illinois Central Railroad; Robert Schuyler (1851–1853), William P. Burrell (1853–1854), John N. A. Griswold (1855), William H. Osborne (1855–1865), John M. Douglas (1865–1871, 1875–1876), John Newell (1871–1874), Wilson G. Hunt (1874–1875), William K. Ackerman (1876–1883), James C. Clark (1883–1887), Stuyvesant Fish (1887–1906), James T. Harahan (1906–1911), Charles H. Markham (1911–1918), Charles A. Peabody (1918–1919), Charles H. Markham (1919–1926), Lawrence A. Downs (1926–1938), John L. Bevan (1938–1945), Wayne A. Johnston (1945–1967), William B. Johnson (1967–1969), Alan Stevenson Boyd (1969–1972), William J. Taylor (1976–1983), Harry J. Bruce (1983–1990), Edward L. Moyers (1990–1993), E. Hunter Harrison (1993–1998). Preservation. Some historic equipment owned and used by Illinois Central can be found in museums across the United States, including 201, a 2-4 tank locomotive that participated in the Wheels A Rolling pageant at the Chicago Railroad Fair, preserved on static display at Illinois Railway Museum. 764, a 651 Class II 8-0 donated to the Museum of Transportation, St. Louis, Missouri in 1956. 790. Preserved on static display at Steamtown National Historic Site, believed to be in good condition that restoration to operations is feasible. 2,500. A 2,500 Class 482 preserved on static display in the Age of Steam Memorial in Centralia, Illinois. 2,542. A 2,500 Class 482 preserved on static display at Macomb, Mississippi. A yard office and unique coal fueling tower remain at the Illinois Central Yards in Council Bluffs, Iowa. IC 8408 GP10 locomotive, IC 9426 caboose static display Homewood, Ill. IC 333 A060 steam engine, and several passenger cars are on display just outside the historic Sioux and Mississippi Valley Railroad Company depot in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. IC a R1518 Mikado steam locomotive in Riverfront Park, Paducah, Kentucky. Illinois Central GP11 number 8701, along with an IC caboose, preserved on static display at the Carbondale passenger station in Carbondale, Illinois. Illinois Central GP11 number 8733, preserved at the Monticello Railway Museum in Monticello, Illinois. An Illinois Central caboose and banana car are preserved at the Casey Jones Railroad Museum in Water Valley, Mississippi. An Illinois Central caboose is privately owned and preserved in Raymond, Mississippi at the old train depot in the center of the town. IC combine number 892, IC day coaches 2920-2855-2612, IC business car number 7, IC 10-6 sleeper number 3531, Council Bluffs, IC dorm baggage #1906, IC number 518. IC Panama Limited observation Gulfport, ICG cement hopper number 100,040, IC number 65,018, IC bridge crane #X238, IC #X1957 boxcar, IC #X2000 idler flat, IC #SX4342 and X4352 tenders, IC X9151 Jordan spreader, and IC cabooses 9926-9831-9880, all of which are restored and displayed at the Monticello Railway Museum in Monticello, Illinois. Illinois Central SD40-2 number 6071 at the Monticello Railway Museum in Monticello, Illinois. Illinois Central Gulf GP8 number 7738 at the Bluegrass Railroad Museum in Versailles, Kentucky. Illinois Central 9852, a 1941 caboose on display at the Martin and Amp Sioux King Railroad Heritage Museum in Cleveland, Mississippi. Mississippi Central. The original Mississippi Central line was chartered in 1852. Construction of the 255 miles 5 feet gauge line began in 1853 and was completed in 1860, just prior to the Civil War. From Canton, Mississippi to Jackson, Tennessee, the southern terminus of the line connected to the New Orleans, Jackson and Great Northern Railroad at Canton. It also connected to the Memphis and Charleston Railroad at Grand Junction, Tennessee, and the Mobile and Ohio Railroad at Jackson, Tennessee. The Mississippi Central was the scene of several military actions from 1862 to 1863 and was severely damaged during the fighting. Company President Absalom M. West succeeded in repairing the damage and returning it to operating condition soon after the end of the war. The original Mississippi Central line was merged into the Illinois Central Railroad subsidiary Chicago Street, Louis and New Orleans Railroad in several transactions finally completed in 1878. Mississippi Central, a line started in 1897 as the Pearl and Leaf Rivers Railroad, was built by the J. Newman Lumber Company from Hattiesburg to Sumrall. In 1904 the name was changed to the Mississippi Central Railroad. In 1906 the Natchez and Eastern Railway was formed to build a rail line from Natchez to Brookhaven. In 1909 this line was absorbed by the Mississippi Central. For a short time during the 1920s, the line operated a service named the Natchez Route, running trains from Natchez to Mobile, Alabama through trackage agreements with the Gulf, Mobile and Northern Railroad. At Natchez, freight cars were ferried across the Mississippi River to connect with the Louisiana and Arkansas Railway to institute through traffic into Shreveport, Louisiana. In 1967 the property of the Mississippi Central was sold to the Illinois Central Railroad.